Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the fourth session of Indiana 211 University. As a reminder, recordings of all of our previous sessions can be found on our website at in211.org. We would love to hear your feedback on today's session through our survey. You can access the survey through the QR code on the screen or using the link that I believe Jill will put in the chat here in a moment. I do suggest opening that now or at some point during the session so that you don't lose that link before the session ends. As a reminder, if you plan to use today's session towards continuing education credits, then you do need to complete this survey and note that under the applicable question so that we can keep a record of your attendance in case you ever need us to provide that record to you. With October being Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we have Lizzie McGreevy here with us today to present on domestic violence. Lizzie worked for the Marion County Family Recovery Court with mothers who had substance use and co-occurring disorders. She also worked as the Domestic Violence Outreach Specialist here at Indiana 211 from March 2019 to January 2024. Lizzie now works for WFYI Public Media at the Health Desk. As Lizzie is presenting today, if you have any questions for her, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A section, and we will address those at the end of her presentation. Lizzie, we are happy to have you back with us today, and without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Like Sherry said, my name is Lizzie McGreevy. I use she, her pronouns. And you can see my contact information below. And Sherry has my work email. So if that's easier for you to get a hold of me, you can always ask her for that as well. We'll be talking about Domestic Violence 101 today. So you can see here a roadmap of what we'll be discussing, defining domestic violence, the types of domestic violence, what to ask, and safety planning. So I use the definition from the Office of Violence Against Women, and that is that domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another intimate partner. Domestic violence can be physical, sexual, emotional, economic, psychological, or technological actions or threats of actions or other patterns of coercive behavior that influence another person with an intimate partner relationship. This includes any behaviors that intimidate, manipulate, humiliate, isolate, frighten, terrorize, coerce, threaten, blame, hurt, injure, or wound someone. And now we'll go over some of the types of domestic violence. So first we have the financial, or as the definition called it, economical types of DV. Next slide, please. So when we think of financial, this can be one of the reasons that someone does not leave that relationship. Often, the biggest question is like, well, why don't they just leave? What are they waiting for? And sometimes they don't have that economic freedom or ability to leave. And so financial abuse can appear in a lot of different ways, and that could include forbidding to work. So it could be that the coercive partner is telling the other partner that they're not able to work. Maybe they need to stay home with kids. Maybe they need, oh, I just want you to live a life of luxury and you don't need to work. And basically it means that other partner doesn't have the ability to have their own funds. It can also leave like a large gap in their resume, making it harder to get work. And so we see it in that way. We can see it also as sabotaging employment. That could be like showing up at the person's work and demanding to see them. It could be calling and making threats to the employer. It could be I've seen in the past where the coercive partner would call and make up lies about that person. Maybe that person was a truck driver or used heavy machinery or something where using alcohol or a substance would be very dangerous for that job, and call and say like, well, they're using, you need to test them immediately, and things of that nature. And so we can see that controlling money. So maybe both partners are working, but everything is in the coercive partner's name, or they're saying, they're looking at all the spending online and they're saying, well, you can't have this. Um, you know, you can't be spending money on this, that, and the other. And so it can make it really hard for that person to save to get out. Or they can see if they're maybe trying to like rent a hotel room for the night to get away, or taking money out in cash in certain increments. Like they can see all of that and they can control that money. Not included in financial decisions. So this could be like buying a house that's in another town or part of the country or something, to like isolate them away. It could be not including them in decisions about like what the budget looks like, maybe spending all the money. Um, it could be that the partner has no access to their accounts. So maybe they're even contributing to that account by having a job, but they don't have any access. The passwords get changed regularly. They don't have the password. They're not on, their name is not on that account. And so they're not able to go in and get that money or utilize any of those assets. Withholding money, it could be that they just aren't giving them money. And so that could be that they don't have access for food for themselves or their dependents. It could be that they don't have money for medical necessities, or it could just be that they don't have money so that they can get out at a later date. Running up large debts. So that could be like in a fraudulent way, or it could be on a shared account. And that could ruin a credit score, which could make it harder to like get a house or a car, whatever that looks like. Refusing to work or contribute to finances. We see this as well. Withholding funds for medical or other necessities or necessities for those children. So it could be that like maybe the partner is on Suboxone and they have to pay every time they go in, and the coercive partner is not giving them that money or not allowing them to pay for therapy, or saying like, well, you don't need gas in your car. What do you need to go out and do? Or not allowing the children to get medical necessities or just necessities in general. Next slide, please. Physical abuse. This is what I think a lot of people think of when they think of domestic violence. The domestic violence movement as a whole has really tried to turn away from, like, I don't know if any of you remember seeing, in church, like yards, lots on like the little signs or on billboards where it would be like a woman with a black eye or with like strangulation marks or something. And they're really trying to move away from that being like the face of domestic violence. But obviously, this is still happening, and strangulation has been on the rise, not just within domestic violence, but like nationally. And I think it's even more so for Indiana. Karen Burton with the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence is a great resource if you have questions about strangulation, or you want to learn more about the statistics, or even what is Indiana's plan to deal with strangulation. And so we do see this happening in domestic violence. We also see this happening a lot with sexual assault, that it is like even consensual sexual acts are becoming more aggressive. And it can we can talk about this a little more when we talk about the sexual part of domestic violence, but consenting to sex doesn't mean you're consenting to, like, you have to get consent for everything. And so we're seeing strangulation among all of that. It's also important to note that people might report this as choking to the police, to an advocate, to our 211 call center. And choking is what happens when you're like choking on a piece of gum or food. Strangulation is the act of like another human inflicting that on you. And like, we don't need to, you don't need to correct their language or anything, but that is something that is brought up in every strangulation training I've attended. And strangulation is also an important one because there are a lot of medical and physical health results of that might not be apparent initially. And so it is important that we try to like get them medical attention, but we also want them to be safe. Hitting, punching, burning, and that can be like burning them with a cigarette, anything like that. Use of weapons. refusing medical care or medicine. So maybe the person has a mobility aid and they put their walker across the room in a different room, in a locked room, somewhere that they can't get it. Maybe they have medicine. It could be like for heart disease, it could be for anxiety or anything, and they lock that up or refuse to let them get that, or swap those medications out. And coercion into substance use. So those are some of the things that we see when we talk about physical abuse. Next slide, please. Emotional and mental. So there's the name calling, blaming for everything. So it could be a lot of not taking accountability. If we want to go back to that financial piece of like, we don't have any money, like, what are you spending it on? And the person doesn't even have access to those accounts. Extreme jealousy, intimidation, humiliating, shaming, isolating, stalking, and controlling. So that's where they go, who they see, who they can talk to. That also really relates back to that isolating. And the isolating was a big one, of course, during COVID. And controlling also, we saw that during the like quarantining phase of COVID would be like, oh, you're gonna leave. Well, I probably have COVID, so you're just gonna go infect all of these people. Or you can't leave because we might have COVID or something like that. So we saw a lot of that during the pandemic as well. Isolating can also come from a lot of this like shaming and humiliating. A lot of it could be like, well, I don't know why you call your mom. She doesn't even like you. Like she texted me and said she doesn't care. Your friends talk about you behind your back, and all of this can again tie into that isolating. Basically, the coercive partner wants to sever those ties so that there are fewer supports within the community that they can talk to or that they might be able to rely upon if they do decide to leave. Next slide, please. Sexual assault. So obviously sexual abuse can happen outside of a domestic violence relationship, but it also very much can happen within that. And I would just like to say, remember that being in a relationship is not the same thing as consenting to sexual acts of any kind. So sexual assault can look like a person that you've had consensual sex with, and then not having consent for that specific act, or having sex at all in that situation. Can also look like lying about or withholding STI or HIV status. And so not being truthful about that. And then that might lead to the other partner getting those STIs or HIV. Tampering with birth control. We heard about this a lot a few years ago, where people were poking holes in condoms, or lying about taking the pill, or like we've seen things about like switching out birth control pills, coercing into sexual acts. And so, rape under duress is a thing. It could be that the partner is fearful for their life, or what could happen if they don't consent to it, or it could just be like, I'm going to do X, Y, or Z if you don't do this. Hurting during sexual acts. So that relates a little bit back to that strangulation. So it could be that both partners consent to having sex. However, the coercive partner is using strangulation, slapping, hitting, burning, other things during that sexual act that weren't consented to. And coercing not to use birth control. So not even tampering with it at this point, but just like flat out refusing to use it, or not allowing the other partner to use that. And again, sexual assault doesn't just happen within domestic violence, but it is important to remember that it can happen within DV. Next slide, please. So now we can talk a little bit about what to ask. So I tried to think of this in a very broad sense. For those who work at 211, they're not going to be the ones doing the assessments. And so I tried to keep it as like broad and high level as possible. So obviously, like if you have more of a relationship with this person, if you're a case manager, something like that, you might be able to ask more questions. But one big thing is, are you safe to talk right now? Because it's possible that the coercive partner is in the room and listening. We never know with technology, like, is that phone tapped? Are they listening? Are there cameras in the home or wherever this person is speaking? So are you safe to talk right now? Can I call you back if we disconnect? I know that this is something talked about within 211. It can be really dangerous to call back and reveal like, hey, I'm this person. Again, if that if they hung up because the coercive partner came in the room or whatever that looks like, or maybe they're listening on into that call. So can I call you back if we disconnect? And then with that, is it okay if like I reveal who I am? And so it could just be like, hey, this is so and so from 211. That could be a safer call. Maybe you're with another service, or you are with another FSSA agency, and so you can reveal that, and that might not be as dangerous. However, if the coercive partner finds out that the other partner is looking to leave, that can become extremely dangerous and definitely increases their risk of fatality and other injuries. So find out what services, if any, they're seeking. Can we go back to the last slide? Sorry. So this is a little bit directed at 211, but then just generally, if someone is revealing to you that they're in a domestic violence relationship, if it's like a personal thing, you can sort of ask like, are you just trying to confide in me? Are you looking for help? Like, you don't have to leave right now, but in what ways can I support you when that time comes? So do they want to leave the home? They might not want to leave the home. It might be that the coercive partner has been locked up, or maybe the home is in their name, is in the survivor's name. So if they do want to leave the home, you can ask what services can you wrap around for this. So that could be like, are you going to shelter? Maybe you're able to go stay with your mom or your friend or your brother, but you would like other services. So asking what services you can wrap around, or if they're looking for shelter. Have they already left, but they maybe need therapy, an advocate, or other services? Are they seeking legal services? And then they might need support that isn't domestic violence related. So for that, I mean something that's not like specifically a domestic violence shelter or domestic violence like named service or therapy. So maybe they're looking for employment. Maybe they're in like a different county or a different state. And they're looking for different employment or employment for the first time. Maybe they're looking for childcare, might be looking for healthcare. It's probable that a person hasn't been receiving health care if they're in a domestic violence relationship, or if they are, that they haven't been able to be honest with their physicians and their physicians teams, because they might have been monitored by the partner at those doctor's appointments. Next slide, please. And safety planning tips. So you can click here. I know you can't click here, but I don't know if you're going to receive the slides, but there's an interactive guide to safety planning from the domestic violence hotline. And safety planning is aimed to reduce risk to the survivor and their children or pets. Always work with the survivor when you're creating a safety plan. There is no one set like, okay, you need to bring this, this, and this, call this person, here you go. It's not something you can just hand out that's like a blanket safety plan. If you're able to pack a bag for this, if the survivor is able to pack a bag, put it somewhere secure. So when I did direct service, sometimes that was like, okay, you're going to leave one with me. Maybe you're leaving them with like another case manager or therapist. It could be that you have it in an area of the house that isn't monitored, or where it might make sense for there to just like be a bag. And check to see if your location is being tracked through various devices. So that could be like, we've seen an uptick in the like Apple tags being added to cars, or someone's like bag that they take everywhere, or to check to see if your phone, tablet, whatever is being tracked as well. There are services that can provide like flip phones or old phones to a survivor so that they won't be tracked into the shelter. This information is from Hubbard House. So consider packing the following items: your driver's license or identification, birth certificate for each person who's leaving, social security card again for each person, cash, credit card, debit card, checks, any of that financial stuff, as well as your financial documents. So like, is your name on the lease, even if it's on the lease with another person, mortgage payments, bank records, etc. Marriage license, divorce paperwork, custody agreement, restraining orders or protective orders, medical records, insurance, medication, mobility aids, medical supports. If you're able to get a prepaid phone, take that with you. Proof of benefits like SNAP, TANF, CCDF, anything like that. Keys. And that could be to like if you have keys to your workplace, keys to your car, mom's house, whatever, your work permit, green card, visa, passport, immigration related documents, any sentimental items that's mentioned on here, because a lot of times you can't get those back. And then come for items of children. Um, One thing is that like I know that the folks at 211 can help connect people if they're like, hey, my I fled before I could have my things back, or sometimes the coercive partner will destroy or like hide these items. So maybe they're left and they don't have their social security card or their birth certificates. I know that 211 can help connect folks with where they can get those. And then if they're fleeing into a shelter or a domestic violence service, they will also be able to do some case management around those things. So while these things are nice to have, the licenses and things like that doesn't mean they're irreplaceable, but it is nice to have them when you leave. There's a lot of paperwork, unfortunately, that goes with all of getting all of that back. Next slide, please. And finally, what are safe rooms in the house? So not near hard surfaces, knives, or weapons. So like ideally, if you know that a confrontation is coming or you're trying to stay safe, you're going to try to stay away from the kitchen. So that's either like redirecting that person or just trying not to be in that room in general. They also mentioned like bathrooms where there's a hard counter or like a hard bathtub or shower, something like that. And how can you call for help? Do you have access to a prepaid phone? Are you able to like run to your neighbor's house to use their phone? Because often those cell phones will be monitored to see who they've been calling, how long they've been on the phone, things of that nature. Plan some escape routes, map out routes so that you have a plan when you do leave. And that can be a route of your home. Like literally, I'm going to leave through the back door. Like if I'm in my bedroom, I'm going to leave from this door. If we're in this other room, I'm going to leave from this door. Do you have mobility assistance that you need? Are you in a wheelchair? Do you have a walker? And figuring out like where can you go from there? What if that isn't of access to you at that time? And then you can also map out a route of like, okay, I left my house. I need to get to my neighbor's house or this house. Like, do I have a bus pass? Where can I get to where I need to go? And create code words with family, friends, or supports. So have a code if you do need support for that family member to call a taxi, Uber, 911. So when I was doing direct service, sometimes I would have like a specific like phrase or emoji, like set of emojis that my clients would text me, like if they need me to call 911 or have someone come and pick them up. They would have this with other supports as well, as other case managers. And so that's always an option as well. That was really quick. Does anybody have any questions?
I did. This is Jill with 211. I wanted to mention that I put the link to the safety plan guide
Thank you.
in the chat.
Thank you so much.
All right, so it does not look like we currently have any questions in the Q&A section. If you have any questions for Lizzie, go ahead and put those in that section now, and we will come back to that. I'll go ahead and move on. I do have a little bit to present from 211 as well, so I'll go ahead and present that, and we'll come back to the Q&A section. All right, so we also wanted to briefly talk to you all about what Indiana 211 has to offer in terms of domestic violence resources. When someone calls 211, the community navigator who answers the call asks a series of social determinants of health questions if the caller gives permission for them to do so. And they do that to try to identify some other needs that they may be able to provide referrals for. And one of the SDOH questions that they ask helps the navigator identify whether the caller is in a domestic violence situation. So the question is, how often does anyone, including family, insult, talk down to you, or threaten you with harm? If the caller says anything except never, then an additional domestic violence assessment will populate so that the navigator can determine whether the caller is safe at the moment and help them develop a safety plan before continuing with referrals. And these are the types of resources that Indiana 211 lists in the database for domestic violence situations. We list domestic violence specific shelters, transitional housing programs, hotlines, support groups, counseling services, case management, court advocacy, and assistance with filing protective orders. For individuals who are needing immediate assistance finding any of these domestic violence resources, it is probably best to call 211 because of that additional assistance that our community navigators provide with the SDOH assessment. But for anyone who is not already aware, we do have a guided search on our website that allows you to search for resources on your own, and all of these resources can be found on there as well. So the guided search is right on our homepage at in211.org, and it can be very beneficial for agencies that are wanting to have their own list of domestic violence resources on hand or any specific type of resource. But in the guided search, there are several different service categories, and each category has a drop down of more specific service types to choose from. So in this example, I've pointed out how to locate domestic violence shelters and domestic violence hotlines. And then after you select a service type from that guided search, you'll be able to put in a zip code to sort the resources from closest to furthest away. I will say with domestic violence resources, since a lot of times the address is confidential, that location search may not be the most beneficial, but you will still be able to find resources on the list. Um, and then each resource that appears in the list provides all of the information needed for a referral, and you will have the option to either email or text individual resources to yourself, or you can save multiple resources to a list to save or to print. And then I also wanted to let you all know that agencies that are interested in promoting Indiana 211 on their website, whether that be for all resources we offer or a specific type of resource like DV resources, you are able to put a link to our guided search on your website. If you would like more information about that or need a logo to accompany the link, you can always contact our community engagement team and we will assist you. All right. And then again, if anyone has any questions about anything I covered or anything Lizzie covered, go ahead and put those in the Q&A section. But we did want to go ahead and let you all know what our next two topics for 211 University will be. On November 13th, the topic will be Veterans and Service Members with two speakers. We'll have Brian Schmidt from the Indiana Department of Veterans Affairs and Obadiah Smith from the Department of Mental Health and Addiction. And then on December 18th, the topic will be Adverse Childhood Experience and Trauma-Informed Care with a speaker from the Indiana Department of Health. All right, well, it does not look like, oh, we might have a question. Let's see.
Yes, it says, what do you do when police are not receptive to someone's request for help? Context, the police have been to the home multiple times and do nothing because the person has not left their abuser. The police may be the first contact for some domestic violence victims. How do we encourage them to not be deterred or to keep documenting abuse?
That's a great question. It's also a tricky question. I mean, I would say if they feel comfortable to continue calling the police so that there's a record of that. They, depending on like what county you're in, there might be an advocate who's able to come out with the officer. And I would say if they're willing to try contacting like 211 or Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence or a local shelter, that's another way to like document that. And so they would be able to get into case management and other things, because a lot of services don't require that you call the police in order to like get in with them. They might also be able to file like a protective order, so they could call Indiana Legal Services or other legal services in their area, to try to get someone with more of a specific domestic violence background and maybe get an advocate in that way. But they're, like I said, they're able to get access to like advocates from Firefly or other agencies without that without that police call. So I don't know if that quite answered your question, but that's a tricky situation. And yeah.
We have another, oh, she said thank you, or he, not sure.
My pleasure. And Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence, I know I keep mentioning them. They are the ones who like, they're the agency that certifies the shelters in Indiana. And they also offer like, they also certify like batterers intervention programs and these other things. So they don't provide direct service per se, but they provide service to the service providers. And I think it's always worth asking them some of those questions as well, if you feel comfortable doing that. They would have more like behind the scenes information and possibly more recommendations for that. And if you know of anyone that has like a shelter complaint or concern, go to ICADD.
All right, well, it does not look like we have any more questions. If anything does come up and you have any questions for us here at 211 or for anything Lizzie presented on today, feel free to reach out to our community engagement team. We'll contact Lizzie and we will get you an answer. And actually, we do have one more question that just came in.
Yes, the question is, where can you direct a woman who has filed a restriction, did I read that? A restriction order against their abuser, but abuser is not respecting and police aren't doing anything? Who can you call?
Another great question. I would see if this person has a domestic violence advocate or like case manager or something. And if not, I would again call Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence and let them know what's happening, and or call 211 or a service provider in their area, because that case manager would likely be able to get them connected with other services, or they do a lot more work with law enforcement directly.
And we had somebody who had their hand raised. Did you want to go ahead and ask your question or type it in the chat? Well, they put their hand down, so. I don't see a question, so perhaps it was an accident. I've put the email address. If you have questions that you think of after this ends, you can go ahead and send them to us at in211info@fssa.in.gov, and I've put that in the chat. I also reposted the link to the safety plan guide if you need to go ahead and try to fill out and complete your safety plan, or you know someone who might benefit from that. And somebody has asked a question. It says, how would someone know if their phones were being monitored, or if someone was using a tracking device?
So they have gotten really sophisticated with the technology for this. So on like an iPhone, you can go in and see like, are you sharing your location with someone? But there are also a lot of devices that won't show up like that. So I often say like, if they are seeing a case manager or like have access to domestic violence case manager, they would be able to check. And then you can just like, if there are any apps on their phone that they're worried about, they could Google that if they're comfortable with that being in their like search history, or have a trusted support Google that and see if it looks funny. The list is long and ever changing, unfortunately. I would say like, if they feel comfortable asking an officer even about that, they might know of some of those. I'm sorry, that's like kind of a non-answer, but it literally like, people are smart, and so that kind of changes all the time.
Any other questions? I think that we may be finished. I don't see any other questions.
Perfect. Well, like Jill said, feel free to send us an email at that email address that's in the chat currently if you have any questions afterwards. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and thank you so much, Lizzie, for presenting for us today.
Thank you for having me.